Hey, welcome back, everyone. So, some big stories tonight. Going into Trump is now, it seems to be officially announcing that he's starting his own social network. One of his advisors came forward with it, is talking about it now, saying within the next few months, Trump is going to be launching his own social network. And on there, he's going to be making his reappearance on social media. And so, something very interesting coming up soon with that. Also, going to be going into some information about what's happening with big media going on right now, as well as what's happening with the Biden administration's China meeting. I'm sure you've all seen what happened in Anchorage. I'm going to go over some analysis on that, a few other stories too. And folks, always good seeing you. How you doing? SD, hey Joshua, good to see you. It's from Joe Eoj. She said hi from Alaska. Good to see you. Steph, good evening as well. Thank you. Yeah, how you doing, everyone? Good to see you all here. All right, folks. Now, as always, if you have questions, leave them in the chat. I'll try to get to them. I'll go over a few stories first and jump into some questions. Yeah, good to see you all here again. Thank you. All right, so let's get started actually for the night. All right, first story we have, this is Epoch Times reporting. It says here, Trump returning to social media with his own platform in several months, according to an advisor. Several months seems like a long time. Let's go into it. It says here, former President Donald Trump will set up his own social media platform and return to posting online in 2 to 3 months. His advisor and spokesperson Jason Miller said in a new interview. Miller had told Fox News, going up further into the story, on March 21st that he expects Trump will, quote, return to social media in 2 or 3 months with his, quote, own platform. And he says this will, quote, completely redefine the game and also attract tens of millions of users. I think that's a fair estimate, given that Trump had at least 74 million votes in the U.S. And we could assume that a lot of those folks would probably jump on there. So I think tens of millions is a pretty conservative estimate. We'll have to see, though. Going a bit further. Now, Miller, who is Trump's most prominent spokesman, didn't elaborate or offer a possible name for the social media venture. And so he didn't really detail much beyond just the fact that within 2 to 3 months, Trump is going to be launching his own social network. And when Trump does launch that, he's going to be pretty much coming back onto the public scene, it seems, maybe more fully. Now, also in the interview relating to this, Miller said that Trump still holds a considerable amount of sway in the Republican Party, I'd say, to say the least. He said, quote, he's already had over 20 senators, over 50 members of Congress call or make pilgrimages, the word he actually used, to Mar-a-Lago. And he added, quote, pay attention to Georgia on Monday, which would be tomorrow, March 22nd, as there is a, quote, big endorsement coming. Now, in an interview last month, Trump said he's going to, quote, he's negotiating, he said, with a number of people. And there's also the other option of building your own social media site. And he continued, quote, because we have more people than anybody. I mean, you can literally build your own site. And he said, wanted to be somewhat quiet. They wanted me very much on Parler. You know, they had a phony report that the man who was in there didn't. I mean, just the opposite. They really wanted me on Parler. So, love to see what happens with this. Based on what he's saying, Trump did consider going on a lot of different social media, including Parler, including Gab. It doesn't seem like he's going to do either of them. Now, it technically wouldn't be unusual if Trump started up a bunch of social media accounts. Really, before he got banned on Twitter, he also had a YouTube page. He also had an Instagram page. He had all these pages. He was most personally active on Twitter, which is where he tended to make a lot of his official announcements. And so I think a lot of people knew his Twitter account. Now, why doesn't Trump just spread that out again now that he's been banned on all these different platforms? Why not open up a Gab account? Why not open up a Parler account? It seems to be the case that he's playing this smart, because wherever he goes first is going to be where his entire following goes. Everybody wants to see what Trump is saying. Both people who love him and people who hate him are going to have to go to that new platform. And as media reports on what Trump says, which they almost inevitably will, because they want to make him look bad. And frankly, if they don't report on him, they're going to be basically allowing other media like Epic Times or other independent media to basically run the whole show on reporting on what he's saying, which they're not going to do. And so what's going to happen? Trump's going to start his own social media platform. The entire base of followers he has, whether it be tens of millions or 74 million, or who knows, maybe even more than that, are very likely going to go there, not to mention international audiences probably using it as well. Which means what else? Any advertiser that goes on there is going to be cancel culture friendly. In other words, they're not going to go along with it. And so really you're going to have an alternative advertising base. In order to launch this platform, he also has to build the foundational infrastructures, because we saw with Parler, for example, that is not in place. If, for example, the server systems and such are not in place, they can cancel them. They can delete the whole thing. And the chances of them deleting, whatever Trump social media is called versus deleting Parler, like Amazon Web Services did, is going to be a whole lot higher. Meaning that Trump is probably looking at the situation right now. They have to build the infrastructure first. After building the infrastructure, building the platform. Then you need to say, sorry, Leonard Garcia, you cracked me up. Huzzah. All right. Anyways, after the foundations are in place, which is going to need, including a financial element to it, right? A way to actually finance it. He can start actually offering this as a platform for advertising for other social media, other media sites, for example. He can start offering it as a way to maybe even providing these web services to other platforms that want to have web service that won't be canceled by cancel culture. Really, what you're going to see here is something more significant than just Trump having a platform. What you're going to see here with the creation of this is a platform where people can speak and not be censored for doing so, we can assume. And what does that mean as well? It means that the media and big business, big tech, big corporate media, and big politics system, really, is not going to be able to cancel people, is not going to be able to censor people, is not going to be able to suppress people, is not going to be able to remove voices they don't like, delete YouTubers, delete people from Twitter if they say things outside the narrative, is not going to be able to do their, fact checks on the bottom of videos or articles. The entire system of control they have over media, the entire system of control they have over YouTubers, all of these things very likely will fade with the creation of this social network. Because, think back to 2016, right? Think back to 2016 and compare it to 2020. What was the difference? Remember in 2016 when you had voices all over Twitter, all over Facebook, all over YouTube, pretty much promoting Trump. You had these meme sites promoting him all over the place. You had people making jokes all over the place. You had, the trolls and stuff, which were, of course, maybe went against Trump later on. You had all those people. How many YouTubers that you used to watch back in 2016 are still there? How many YouTubers got deplatformed? How many meme makers like Carpe Dunkum got canceled? How many people got kicked off their platforms for various reasons? And then what happened in 2020, right? In 2020, when that came around, pretty much there were just a small handful of remaining voices. And those remaining voices were not very loud because the platforms they were on did not have the ability to amplify things like the big ones do, like they used to. And so when that happened, right? When that happened, really the media, the mainstream media and the institutions, big media, big tech, big government working together, were able to pretty much formulate whatever they wanted, cancel anybody they wanted, and say what is true or untrue, however they wanted. Meaning that you couldn't even question their narratives without getting a big fact check, right? Fact check. Now, that control system, that system they use to control the narrative, will start fading. And as it fades again, you're going to see a big change, I think, happen in this country. Really, this is going to be pretty big, I think. Now, we'll have to see how this works out as it goes forward. The other big part of this here is that Trump's not, or his advisors, not just announcing, Trump social media, whatever it's going to be. Who knows what they're going to call it? It's probably going to be something along the Trump brand, we can assume. But once that launches also, he's going to be announcing, probably leading his political campaigns on it. It does seem to be the case. His advisors also saying that watch tomorrow, they're going to do some big endorsement on Georgia. And what does this mean on another level? It means that Trump is also going to have a platform now to spread his message, to begin his movement again, this MAGA movement that he started, and his family is now behind, pushing as well. And this MAGA movement, which now is getting senators and members of Congress, 20 senators, over 50 members of Congress total, to go to Mar-a-Lago and who knows doing what, swearing fealty to Trump or something like that. Trump is the de facto leader of the Republican Party, even though he doesn't currently have a real position in the Republican Party. And as he goes toe-to-toe with the RNC, with that level of influence, and as he begins touring again, doing his Trump rallies, which he very likely probably will, you're going to start seeing a lot of things change. And then as this happens as well, anything, we've of course seen Biden make executive order after executive order, doing things that are very extreme, really even by Democrat standards, even by the way government is usually done, very extreme standards. What he's been doing essentially is rolling back everything Trump did, doing it through executive order, and then restoring pretty much everything that the left had been hoping to have had in place by now, meaning that Biden pretty much within a couple months destroyed the Trump, presidency as much as he could, erased it as well as he could, and then put into place the system that they wanted in place as well as he could. Now, they've done this very rapidly, but very likely he's done this early on and very rapidly because they know that as 2022 nears, and when you're going to have the elections to take back the House and Senate for the Republicans, as that nears, the narrative battle is going to be very important. And anything they do that is regarded as too extreme is going to be used as fuel within that narrative battle, right? And Trump, with his new social media platform, who knows what else, is going to have a platform to wage that narrative battle. You're going to have almost an intranet, two separate internets, essentially, between the right and the left. The big question is going to be whether Trump can actually get people who are more leftist to go on there, people who might not like him to go on there. And also a big question is going to be whether he can get other folks on there as well, maybe from other countries, maybe from, maybe the middle of the road, whether he can do that as well. We'll have to see. But again, we'll have to watch as it plays out. And of course, I'll be keeping you all updated on that. That says, let's jump into a few questions and then we'll go. Actually, let me go over real quick. I almost forgot. Now, folks, we've been, of course, deplatformed pretty badly. Speaking of which, right? We've been deplatformed pretty badly with Crossroads. We've been totally demonetized by YouTube. But of course, we do have supporters. And one of our advertisers is Shen Yun Dancer. I want to give a big thanks to them. Now, Shen Yun Dancer apparel, I'm wearing right now actually, is markedly different from what is trendy today. Every feature, including the fabric, color palette, style, and cut, bears the distinct aesthetic of Shen Yun. Shen Yun Dancer clothing provides men with a classy, distinguished, and timeless look, great for everything from the office to the street. Take their polo, for example, which I'm wearing currently. While most polos are great for either the golf course or the backyard party, they might not be dressy enough for the office. Shen Yun Dancer makes a comfortable and versatile long-sleeve polo in a classic cut. Woven trim in the cuffs, which is quite nice as well, right? And collar and add a classic finish to a shirt designed to impress. And I have a couple of them. I quite like them. You can visit Shen Yun Dancer, ShenYunDancer.com, and you get 10% off your first order by using the promo code JOSH10. Highly recommended, folks. All right, let's jump into a few questions, and then we'll go into a few more stories. Let's see here. This is from Clone199 Trooper. He said, thoughts on what kind or kinds of media platforms he made. If I were to, this is pure speculation. If I were to guess what Trump is doing with this new social media platform, he has a lot of options. Now, really, in the United States, we have the three, a handful of big platforms, right? There's your Twitter, there's your YouTube, there's your Instagram, there's your Facebook, and then there's other big tech platforms like Amazon and so on, right? YouTube, right? Essentially, you have your video site. Real quick, let me go into this a bit more. You have your video site, YouTube. You have your pseudo microblog, which is Facebook. You're updating what you're doing. You have your random idea spot, Twitter. You have your photo spot, Instagram, and you have your marketplace, Amazon. This is the system of control for most of the internet. And then if you include if you include search engines in there, of course, you have your Google and the system behind that. Those are actually easy to replace if you were to build a centralized platform. The question is, would you want to do it? Now, in China, because they tend to take successful platforms in the West and remake them and steal them, right? Some of them more directly, like Baidu, is pretty much just a direct Google ripoff. Replace them using their own systems. And really, in some countries like China, you have more centralized systems, ones that take these different functions and combine them into one place. It actually, and keep in mind, a lot of platforms do this, they just don't make the interface as good with that. I could actually see, so for example, if you're talking about Parler, you can actually upload videos on. You can upload almost total, like big long videos on. I don't know what even the limit is. They're pretty long videos, meaning that it could actually double as a YouTube replacement to some extent, not everything, but some extent, if you were to have a better interface for it. Now, the Trump social media platform, we can assume it's going to be more of a Twitter type platform, I would assume, because that's how Trump likes to get his own message out. But Trump's been kicked off everything. I would assume as well they're going to include some kind of group function, because Trump is looking into grassroots. He's looking to the grassroots. He's talked specifically about community organizing, and most of that's done on Facebook with your Facebook groups. So we would assume, without a doubt, it's going to have the Twitter replacement functions because Trump wants that. You're very likely going to have a group organizing function because Trump's movement needs that. Very likely as well, you're going to need a video system because you're going to need that as well, because even Trump's speeches get taken off the internet. For example, his speech at CPAC just recently, anybody who posted that on YouTube got a strike by YouTube, and then YouTube was also deleting them. So you would be penalized as a video maker on YouTube had you posted Trump's speech, meaning that Trump will not have a way of getting his speeches out in the public other than direct in person unless he has that video function. So we would assume now, just in terms of basic needs for the movement he's starting and what he would use it for, he's going to have very likely Facebook groups replacement, Twitter replacement basic functions, and some sort of video function. I would say these are the three basics of what we can expect from his platform. You're also going to need a monetization system. And so maybe he's going to build his own ad network. And you're also going to need a cloud system to support the site, because as we saw, for example, Amazon Web Services could cancel them at any moment, especially if they argue that people are organizing protests. Trump has talked about getting involved in community organizing, especially if that is going to be part of it, which we know it is, meaning that Amazon Web Services probably shut it down. And so I'd say at least these 5 functions. Again, Twitter function, video function, group function. Did I say video function already? Server function, and then advertisement function. I would imagine it will have all these built into it right from the get-go, because that's what he's going to need. Now, beyond that, what more would you even need? Maybe a marketplace, maybe like some kind of Amazon type thing where people can start markets, so like an Etsy type function. Although I think that's maybe a jump. I don't know if he'd include something like that, but I think it'll be very interesting if he builds those 5 systems into it. That's going to be big. Real quick, this is from NC for YouTube. You said, Josh, are you also on Rumble? Yes, Crossroads is on Rumble. You say, how about a channel on Safe Chat? I don't think we have a channel on Safe Chat. We do have an official Safe Chat group. Crossroads one, I'm also on there. I tend to use Parler more than I do anything these days, and trying to get active on Twitter again, even though I'm wary of doing it, because after they kicked Trump off and after they kicked a lot of people off, I had I think 74,000 followers. It dropped down to like 53,000 almost overnight, and so I don't know if that meant they censored me or if it meant that 20,000 people who are following me got kicked off the platform, or what that meant. But frankly, I don't trust these big corporate platforms that much anymore. And also, I'm worried about putting much effort into getting behind them because they can just cancel you any day. Of course, we're on YouTube currently, but hopefully there's some stuff in the works, and I know some stuff in the works that may change the need for that. We'll have to see. You're asking, though, specifically about Rumble and Safe Chat. Yes, Crossroads is on both, and so you can follow us on there. Safe Chat, I don't know if they have a full video function yet, but Rumble does, and yes, we do have a Rumble channel. Let's see here. This is from Liz Lovegood. He said, Josh, have you heard anything about Linwood's whistleblower? It doesn't seem to be going anywhere since he shared the information with the FBI. Big surprise there. I haven't heard directly from Linwood on that. I did see the reports on it. I was in touch with him just for the interview I did with him. Haven't heard much since, though. I did see the reports on that, but I didn't see the evidence on it. And of course, the Supreme Court doesn't seem that interested in following things these days. And the FBI, as unfortunate as it is, tends to be more politicized in their investigations with big stuff, at least. It's just the unfortunate reality. Tony Goze said, what are you drinking? Please tell people where your books are. Oh, right. So you may notice my books are gone. Don't worry, I'm not getting rid of them. I'm not Dr. Seussing them, or whatever you want to call it these days. I'm in the process of moving currently, and so you can't see it on camera, but I'm surrounded by boxes and moving to a better area a little bit. Not totally ideal, but good in New York standards in terms of what you have to deal with, and so I'm in the process of moving. Hopefully by next week, this time my bookshelf will be put back together and everything will look good again. So do apologize in the meantime for the blank bookshelf. Yeah. And the drink tonight is just good old-fashioned black tea with honey. Yeah, quite nice, actually. All right, let's see here. This is from It's Just Me Tim. Just Me Tim 79. He said, what is it called? Trumpies? Talking about Trump social media. That'd be funny. I mean, we'll have to see what he ends up calling it. I could see him pulling up a lot of different names potentially. One thing Trump does that's very funny and that actually gets a lot of attention. Now, you might have noticed, let me step back a little bit. Typically Republicans are the nice guys when it comes to arguments. I know they're not painted as such, but they tend to be more traditional. They tend to be more religious, and they tend to be more restrained when it comes to personal attacks, which is actually why a lot of Reagan-era Republicans actually did not like Trump. I know quite a few Reagan-era Republicans who didn't like Trump. They didn't like the way he did things. Now, there are a lot of people who felt otherwise. David Horowitz, for example, he had a really interesting video I remember of him soon after Trump was elected saying, Trump came out and the way he debated Hillary, just attacking her basically. That is what Republicans were lacking, that Trump taught Republicans how to fight. And I know that for a lot of Reagan-era Republicans and more traditional Republicans, they really didn't like that. And a lot of people who don't like Trump's temperament didn't like him for that. But what the effect of that was, I think is important. Now, the left, Democrats most to an extent, but I'd say more the far left, they tend to work on basically promoting really extreme arguments. This is the way the whole communist dialectic works. You present a really extreme, right? The furthest extreme you can make it in terms of arguments, right? Push it as far as you can do it. And then you ask people to meet you halfway. Every time they meet you halfway, you win half the battle. And then they do it again, and they do it again, and they do it again, and the bar moves further and further and further left every time they do it. Now, what you need in order for people to get out of that is to not engage in the dialectic, to not meet them halfway, to hold your ground and say, no, I'm not going to play these stupid games. I'm not going to go along with this nonsense. I'm not going to get involved in these arguments you're using to, advance this agenda you're trying to push. Not going to debate all these stupid issues you're pushing, not going to get into it. That is what Republicans, conservatives, and anybody who's opposed to the far left extremist stance should do, including, I'd say, even classical liberals who really, ironically, the stuff they're pushing now goes against everything classical liberalism stood for. Technically, I would say Most Republicans these days are more classical liberals. They're not even conservatives by the traditional sense. Most of them are classical liberals. But that's where our politics is right now. It's extreme left pushing very extreme agendas and trying to get people to meet them halfway. And every time people are friendly and they go along with them and meet them halfway and want to negotiate with them, the bar moves even further and further towards that progressive agenda, that far left agenda. Now, Trump taught them how to say, not only am I not going to engage in your argument, but I'm going to make fun of you. I'm going to make you look like a fool. And Trump also, actually, it's funny, the media fell for it over and over again. But if you actually read Trump's policy book, which was called Crippled America, when he got elected, I bought a copy and I read it. And actually, I think it's important to know what your president's going to be doing with their policies. It was very interesting because Trump actually outlined that strategy. And the way he describes it in his own words, in his own book, is he says that pretty much, the media want sensational stories, and he gives them sensational stories. He says that he says extreme things with the purpose of getting media headlines that get a lot of attention. He says the media love it. It benefits them. It benefits me. That was his stance. And Trump, going forward, using that strategy, played them like marionettes, right? Made them all dance. Trump, there could be any narrative going on in the country, whatever the left is trying to push. Trump would come out with one of his social media tweets or something like that, and the entire national discussion would just switch focus right to that, and Trump would dominate the airwaves for another 24 hours at least. He was very good at doing that. You might have seen recently that a lot of Republicans actually are doing that as well now, and I find it to be very interesting because you would never see them doing this otherwise. I've seen a lot of Republicans make tweets that are borderline offensive and pretty extreme in my opinion. But understanding this underlying strategy, this Trump strategy, I wouldn't say they're as good at it as Trump was, but understanding this underlying strategy, it's actually very clever because what they're doing is switching the narrative. They're switching the attention, right? They're moving the bar. They're changing things. And it's this that Trump is doing. It's this that Trump is actually very good at. One more question. We'll go into some more stories for the night. Now, this is from Francesca Ortale. You said he also needs a news network. Yeah, we'll see. I'm not sure where things are at, but I did hear Trump was going to be investing in one of the big new independent news networks, not Epic Times. It was Newsmax or OAN, and I can't remember which. But I'm not sure where that's at or how that's going. We'll have to see. All right, folks. Let's go into some more stories. Now, a few interesting things going on. I want to start off first with what's happening with some big media right now because there's been an interesting update with this. Epic Times reports federal judge alleges Democrats are close to controlling all major news outlets. And it says here, D.C. Circuit Court Judge Lawrence Silberman outlined his opposition to the Supreme Court's key decision in 1964 in New York Times versus Sullivan, which has since protected many media outlets from lawsuits. Silberman, a Reagan appointee, wrote that the ruling is a, quote, threat to American democracy and must be overturned. And he said, quote, the increased power of the press is so dangerous today because we are very close to one-party control of these institutions. Our court was once concerned with the institutional consolidation of the press, leading to a bland and homogeneous marketplace of ideas. It turns out that ideological consolidation of the press, helped along by economic consolidation, is the far greater threat. And he added, although the bias against the Republican Party, not just controversial individuals, is rather shocking today, this is not new. It is a long-term secular trend going back to at least the 70s. Now, he adds, I do not mean to defend or criticize the behavior of any particular politician. 2 or 3 of the most influential papers, at least historically, the New York Times and the Washington Post, are virtually Democratic Party broadsheets. And the news section of the Wall Street Journal leans in the same direction. The orientation of these 3 papers is followed by the Associated Press and most large papers across the country, such as Los Angeles Times, Miami Herald, and Boston Globe. Nearly all television, network and cable, is a Democratic Party trumpet. Even the government-supported National Public Radio follows along. And it's true. You know, one of the things we see taking place in this country right now is the attempt of the left, the Democrats in particular, to gain control over every branch of government to some extent. Now they have a supermajority. They control the House and the Senate. They're talking about getting rid of the filibuster, meaning that the Democrats can push whatever they want through the House and the Senate, essentially. And even beyond that, you have Trump in charge. You have Biden in charge of the White House currently. And through that, he's able to make executive orders to bypass Congress anyways, meaning they can do whatever they want. They're talking about packing the courts. They have not fully done that yet, but it seems to be the case that the Supreme Court is already acting in their favor. This means they control all three branches of government pretty deeply. Not fully, but pretty deeply. And in addition to this, they're controlling the fourth estate, right? The media. Not the official fourth estate, but people call it the fourth estate, the media. And they also control what's being called the new fourth estate, which is big business, the whole woke capital system. And so they have total control. Now the concern with that, I know some people who maybe along that political persuasion say good because, my ideas are right. But when you don't have a system you don't have checks and balances anymore. You don't have ways to hold people in check anymore. You don't have the ability to criticize anymore. You can see, for example, the way that conservatives are being deplatformed. You can watch it happen. And who's to say that as they push things further and further along their agenda, this progressive agenda, we talked about the dialectic, the way it moves, who's to say as they push it further and further that even people within their own political persuasion won't get canceled? We already see this happening. Dr. Seuss, for example. Dr. Seuss was borderline communist, if not outright communist. We saw it happen to the author of Harry Potter. We saw it happen to even now the feminist movement getting attacked by the trans movement. You're seeing people who were technically pretty far left getting canceled by the extremely far left. And if you don't have, right, if you don't have a system of checks and balances, if you don't have the other side of an argument, if you have one group determining what can or can't be said and you're canceled if you don't follow everything they say because they don't tolerate any kind of criticism or lack of absolute cohesion, I think we're heading towards a very dark direction. And really that is the basis of totalitarianism. I know people toss that word around a lot, totalitarianism, but what does it actually mean, right? It's total control and the use of total control to advance a singular agenda. We do see them doing this already. We technically right now live in a totalitarian state, almost completely, with the one exception to the fact that the institution, the business, the market, the market is still somewhat free. But only to the extent that people are able to start up their own platforms and are able to get outside the control of the big platforms. The way that, for example, Amazon Web Services was able to cancel Parler was a pretty big blow against that. Really, if that's lost, if the free market is lost, that's it. And if you can even cancel people's ability to make purchases, banks, for example, canceling people, banks, for example, saying that certain websites can't use, for example, American Express for purchases, then how can you even get by? I know people talk about, look, you can't say it's violation of free speech because that only protected, personal speech against government, and government can't compel platforms to support or allow speech they don't want to support because that in itself would be a violation of free speech. But what you have right now is the absolute monopoly over these institutions by a small number of corporations, which in turn lobby politicians, get protection from politics through different ways. Section 230 protections for social media being one big example of that. And other forms of government protection that basically make them immune to the rules and checks and balances that even private citizens like you and I have. And so the overlap of big business, big government, big media, and big tech is very strong. And this system marching in lockstep along the same political agenda right now is something that should concern people, I think, across the board. The irony of all this is that the people who support that tend to be opposed to the idea of big corporations and big business and the millionaires and the billionaires, without realizing that it's those exact people pulling the strings on the institutions they believe that support that movement to go against what they actually represent. In other words, they're being lied to, plain and simple. But this is why, again, I think it's great if people can, as soon as possible, start up their new foundations, new technological foundations, to give an alternate platform to support voices like this. And I think it's great if Trump can start up these systems, if Trump can get things moving on this, and if Trump can maybe start the ball rolling on truly independent infrastructure and truly independent businesses that don't follow this lockstep agenda. It is what needs to happen, I think, for the sake of not only the United States and our future, but for the sake of every free country in the world right now, because a lot of these corporations are multinational corporations, and the power they have to cancel presidents, to work as platforms to overthrow governments like we saw in Libya. And remember, like Gaddafi or not, he was a dictator, of course. Remember, Clinton, of course, was talking about statecraft and, was behind that whole thing. They can take down countries. They can take down governments. These platforms are extremely powerful. And if they're weaponized essentially behind a singular motive and a singular political view, the degree to which they can dictate what happens in the world is terrifying. I think anybody who doesn't like bureaucracy, who doesn't like, this whole system of, I'd say total control, anyone who opposes, let me step back. Anybody who opposes complete monopoly, anybody who opposes these types of communism, which is what they are, even under the guise of big business, I think should be concerned about the monopoly these systems have established. And keep in mind, if we go back in history, we debate socialism and communism as just economic theories, but it has never been just an economic theory. It was never just that. In fact, even during the time of Marx, it wasn't just that. It's debated as in terms of sociology and economics only because that's where the debate ended in the time of Marx. It was always a metaphysical theory. It was a belief. And it manifests itself as oligarchy, as Don Fowd is saying. It manifests itself as technocracy through big tech. It manifests itself through the Owenites, the whole, alternative communities, intentional communities scene. It manifests itself in all kinds of ways. You have the Fabian Society, which infiltrated the institutions. You have, for example, the Frankfurt School going through the cultural institutions. There are many forms of it. It's any kind of, I'd say any kind of system of control of a single institution or a single system that can advance this agenda of cultural, moral, and really infrastructure destruction to advance their own agenda, right? We see the fruition of all these systems kind of happening at once right now in many parts of the world. And we're seeing now, I think, the battle for the future when it comes to opposing this type of absolute control that's taking place. And we see now, I think, some big movements showing that maybe there's hope these systems can be challenged. Now, another story here I think you'll all be interested in. Now, there's Epoch Times reporting. New York Times writers deceived readers in stories about Project Veritas, according to the court that they're in right now. Real quick, Sheila Marie said, Josh, why is your store in Crossroads empty? No merchandise to buy and further support you? Yeah, we keep talking about making it. I need to have someone design it. We've been talking about it for like months now. Hopefully we'll have some Crossroads merch if you folks want it. We're working on it. A few other things in the works right now, so give us a bit of time, but we would love to get that done pretty soon. Let's jump into the story first, though. Epoch Times reports. Writers for the New York Times spread deceptive claims about the nonprofit journalism group Project Veritas, a judge ruled this week. In stories from 2020 about Project Veritas videos, writers Maggie Astor and Tiffany Sue inserted sentences that were opinions despite the articles being billed as news. New York Supreme Court Justice Charles Woods said, and here's a quote, "If a writer interjects an opinion in a news article and will seek to claim legal protections as opinion, it stands to reason that the writer should have an obligation to alert the reader, including a court that may need to determine whether it is fact or opinion, that it is an opinion." Wood wrote in a 16-page decision denying the paper's request to dismiss a lawsuit from Project Veritas. And that lawsuit's now moving forward, folks. He filed, James O'Keefe filed it a while back, now moving forward. Now it continues, quote, "The articles that are the subject of this action called the video deceptive, but the dictionary defines disinformation and deceptive provided by defendants' counsel certainly apply to Astor's and Sue's failure to note that they injected their opinions in news articles as they now claim," he added. Now, at issue are 5 articles that Project Veritas alleges contain false and defamatory information. All 5 were about a 2020 video report from the journalism group on alleged illegal voting practices in Minnesota, in Ilhan Omar's district. Now, continues, the judge said he reviewed the total context and tone of the stories and concluded a reader could believe the statements were conveying facts about Project Veritas. The New York Times had argued the statements describing the videos as deceptive and false were opinions and capable of being judged true or false. And this is what these media outlets do. This is interesting in a few ways. Aside from Project Veritas suing New York Times, which it's moving forward, and it seems to be the case that the judge is kind of agreeing with Project Veritas so far. Yeah, Heaven guys noting Veritas has never lost. Actually, I don't think they have lost the lawsuit. They're pretty good at it, actually. Now, this goes further beyond just this lawsuit, though, because this will define actually media protections on inserting opinion into news articles going forward. Now, you might see the way they do this all the time. They've done it to me. They did it to both my documentaries, as a matter of fact. Not New York Times, but other media. I did the virus documentary and the election documentary, both of which were claimed to be false by these different institutions, and both of which, over time, the evidence, I would say, still very strongly holds up. But this is what they do. You might see all the time, they'll say, so-and-so said without evidence, which is not true. Oftentimes they say without evidence, there's plenty of evidence to support it. It's just evidence they choose not to report themselves. Every time they say deceptive, they're stating an opinion. Oftentimes the statements of being deceptive, the thing they're referring to is not deceptive in any way. If anything, their statement of claiming things are deceptive is in and of itself deceptive. And oftentimes their claims that something is false is oftentimes in itself false, because it's false based, again, on their own lack of reporting on the issue. They do this frequently. They do it to Project Veritas frequently. They do it to many institutions frequently. And something very important to note on this is what this means going forward. What does this mean? Now, which platforms have fact checkers? Fact checkers that go around and claim that anything that doesn't agree with their narrative is false. All of them, right? Just about all the big ones. YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. They all have their fact checkers. And these fact checkers have taken on themselves to be the gatekeepers of what is true and what is false, to be the gatekeepers of what is determined as disinformation. And if you actually read the way they do it, websites like Snopes, for example, which really, maybe we should do some episodes talking about how they lie to people. It's ridiculous sometimes. But the way that they frame things, the way that they do things like this, claiming things are false when they're not actually false, and then use the claims of falsehoods to direct the cancel culture mobs to attack people, to defame them, to go after them, and the way they use that to really even impact their ability to run businesses on the internet. Because if you get fact checked on these platforms, they start to lower your spread and lower your reach, reduce your reach. The way that they use these things to go after your advertisers, the way they use these to actually really affect you in very serious ways. They did it to Crossroads, the channel you're watching now, for example. Totally demonetized, and you might notice our subscriber base hasn't grown in, I think, several months. I think we've just been, it looks like it's just locked. They really use these things to go after you. And what this means now is if this case goes through, right? If this case goes through, if the judge determines that Project Veritas wins, that is going to set the precedent that journalists writing news articles and inserting opinion, claiming things are false, in other words, engaging in fact checking, using false information, that in itself can be something they can be sued for. Imagine the impact that will have. I can tell you right now, most of the hit pieces done on Crossroads, done on the videos I've made, done by many independent voices and media outlets, they could be sued. The people who wrote the fact checks could be sued. Now, of course, I work for Epoch Times, and as a journalist myself, I'd say that's concerning a little bit because you got to be really careful what you say. But I'd say any media outlet that already is responsible, I would say, and has its checks and balances in place of fact checking, and make sure they don't commit libel or things like that, they should be okay anyways. So I'm personally not concerned. I think it would be fantastic, actually. And the impact of this as well is that a lot of these different institutions that lie to people and claim that their lies are true and claim that anything that goes against the lies they're spreading is false, they're going to be on the run. Meaning the entire institution of information control and the entire narrative control system is going to fall to pieces if this goes through. And we'll have to see we'll have to see what happens, but I'll be following it as it goes along. And who knows? Maybe we get James O'Keefe on if he wins this one. To comment on it. We'll have to see. But keep you all updated as this moves forward. This is really big stuff. Really big stuff. Now, folks, let's get another story for the night. I want to talk about what happened in Anchorage in Alaska with this meeting between the U.S. and China, the Biden administration, and the Chinese Communist Party. Now, you might have seen the videos on this. The Biden administration got hammered by the CCP representatives. It was embarrassing. They got hammered. The CCP representatives just steamrolled them. And it's important to note what really happened with this and what this means really for a lot of different things, not just for this goes beyond just this meeting. Let's put it that way. It says a lot about what the CCP is going to be doing going forward, and there's some movement on what they're doing going forward already happening right now. I want to give you all some updates on this, explain what really happened with this, and talk a bit more about this. Now, great analysis on Epoch Times I want to go over. It says here, Chinese media spin U.S. China spat in Alaska as diplomatic win for Beijing. Now, I won't go too deep into this. Let me just explain a bit of what happened. Basically, it says here, China's state-controlled media are on the offensive. They're using this. They're riding it and milking it for everything they can get out of it, right? Currently happening right now. It says China's state-controlled media are on the offensive after top Biden administration officials and their Chinese counterparts clashed during their first in-person talks in Alaska. The two-day meeting, covering an array of issues that would have strained relations between the two countries, got off to a rocky start on March 18th, with Chinese officials reacting angrily to criticism of the Chinese Communist Party's human rights abuses and economic coercion. And they lashed out over what they described as unwarranted criticisms. The Chinese diplomats aired bitter denunciations that veered off the usual diplomatic proceedings, extending the allotted 2-minute opening remark for each speaker to a diatribe of roughly 20 minutes. With the translation, what was initially intended to be an 8-minute photo op went on for more than an hour. Now, Chinese media are using this and milking it for everything they can get out of it. But there's a few interesting things to note on this. Let's go and do this analysis from the Epoch Times because I think there's some real important information in here. And I'll explain a bit. It says here, U.S. falls into 4 traps set by the CCP in U.S. China talks. And it says here, the U.S. side fell into 4 traps set ingeniously by the CCP during the talks. First, the holding of high-level talks between the United States and China is itself a CCP trap. Now remember, Trump himself even criticized the Biden administration for even being willing to engage in these talks in the first place. And as Epoch Times notes, really in this different article, not the one being shown right now, next article, really even by engaging in these talks, Trump said that he wouldn't have done it. Trump said it was a bad idea to engage in the first place. And it's true. Let's go into this. After Biden's inauguration on January 20th, Anthony Blinken, the U.S. Secretary of State, spoke with Yang Jiechi, member of the CCP's Politburo, which is kind of like the top body of the Chinese Communist Party, Politburo Standing Committee. And President Joe Biden spoke with CCP leader Xi Jinping, head of the Chinese Communist Party again. Now, judging from their public statements, each side took a different tone. In fact, as far as the current state of U.S. China relations is concerned, it is the CCP that has begged the United States to stop the decoupling and sanctions, meaning that had they played the art of the deal, they would have known, the Biden administration would have known they had the upper hand. They would have known they had the upper hand, but they still engaged in it. They did not engage on from the grounds of having the upper hand. Instead, they came in crawling, ready to engage in friendly diplomacy, and they got their butts handed to them. Just say it plainly, right? Secondly, Yang Jiechi broke the diplomatic protocol by speaking for 16 minutes, which was 8 minutes longer than usual, and his speech was obviously scripted. In particular, which is expected from the CCP. In particular, Yang said in his speech, "I don't think the overwhelming majority of countries in the world would recognize the universal values advocated by the United States or that the viewpoint of the United States could represent international public opinion. This is a clear indication that in the future, the CCP will no longer abide by the rules set by the United States." They're testing the waters here, you see? Now, let's go over this just briefly. Yang said, "I don't think the overwhelming majority of countries in the world would recognize the universal values advocated by the United States." This is a common CCP tactic, this type of language they're using. The Chinese Communist Party will always pretend to have more support than it actually does. It'll try to represent the voices of everyone. They do this all the time. If you learn the way they speak, they do this all the time. They'll say, "Everybody knows, the United States is such and such. Everybody knows this is like this. Everybody knows this is like that." They claim to have broader support than they actually do by pulling from tiny pockets of opinion from different areas and make it seem that it's representative of the entire picture. They do this all the time. And when you try it, you have to really explain things to push back on that. They do that all the time, right? Putting words in other people's mouths to make it seem they have more support than they actually do, or to make it seem like it's not just them expressing their own opinions. They also say, that they don't support the viewpoint of the United States, that it could represent public opinion internationally. And this ties into something deeper, because what they're doing right here is not just challenging the Biden administration on this platform. What they're doing is they're challenging the U.S.-led international order, Pax Americana, whatever you want to call it. The Chinese Communist Party has for a long time been trying to promote their own system, Pax Sinica, peace under China, they call it, or what they call the China model, a different international order under the Chinese Communist Party, something they've been trying to push for a very long time. Now, in addition to this, they're also demonstrating by violating these rules that the CCP is no longer going to abide by the rules set by the United States. It's going further into this. It says the U.S. side, however, sat there obediently and listened to the end. They didn't stop them. They didn't stop them from saying what they were saying. They didn't interrupt them and put their foot down and say, "Okay, you're speaking for 16 minutes now, sir. You're going way over time. This is obviously scripted. I'm not going to play these dumb games you're trying to push. I'm not going to play these games." Remember, Pompeo got up and just walked out on them. Pompeo, if the CCP started doing these things, he would get up and walk out. The Biden administration sat there and listened to them and just let them speak while they just dragged them across the coals. Made fools of them, made them look bad. Now, and for them, this is important too, right? Now, let's go into this a bit more, right? Thirdly, Yang Jiechi drew a red line for the United States, not the other way around. According to a report from Nikkei Asia, Yang said, first of all, that, quote, the United States does not have the qualification to say that it wants to speak to China from a position of strength. It's a pretty bold statement to make, right? Now, Yang added that the CCP's, quote, leadership and China's political system are supported wholeheartedly by the Chinese people. Something pretty arguable if you actually know the situation inside China. Right, not the case. A lot of Chinese people are really unhappy with the CCP. In fact, as we speak right now, there's mass protests there that the CCP is putting down. Now, and he said, and any attempt to change China's social system will be futile. They're saying that you can't change the Chinese Communist Party. They're saying China's political system supported wholeheartedly by the Chinese people. Look, because if they say otherwise, the CCP throws them in gulags or harvests their organs. You know? Not funny, of course, but the statements are so ridiculous. If the CCP believed it had the wholehearted support of the Chinese people, it would not have needed to violently put down the protests in Hong Kong. It would not have needed to throw democracy protesters in prison. It would not need to have slave camps and re-education camps. It would not need to take religious believers and harvest their organs and use them for re-education through labor. If the CCP had the full support of the Chinese people, it would not have needed any of these things. It would not need to, persecute 100 million Christians, 100 million Falun Gong practitioners, Muslim, Uyghurs, Tibetan Buddhists, and people from Inner Mongolia, if it actually had the support of them. Not to mention the entire Tweedong movement, where Chinese people are by the millions, I think over 300 million now, stating their withdrawal from the Chinese Communist Party, the Youth League, and the Young Pioneers. The degree to which the CCP does not have the support of the Chinese people is difficult to understate. Not to mention a lot of the Chinese community abroad is really unhappy with the CCP as well. In fact, the whole, Asia discrimination narrative they're trying to push right now. You're seeing a lot of human rights groups, Chinese human rights groups, use that and say the CCP is persecuting us. The CCP is spreading hatred against us. The CCP is exporting its persecutions abroad through things like the United Front Work Department, which works with big business, big politics, and big media. They take money from it. This organization finances and supports movements to suppress Chinese people even after they leave China. The CCP really had the support of the Chinese people, as they claimed during this argument. They would not have any of this. And so, how it happened that the Biden administration sat there and just listened, right? Now, another point Yang made in his long speech was a series of security and human rights issues the United States had raised with the Chinese side, including the CCP's persecution of Uyghurs, its crackdown on Hong Kong, its economic coercion of allies, its cyber attacks on the United States, and its acts of aggression against Taiwan. Yang declared these are all China's internal affairs and that the Chinese regime firmly opposes U.S. interference. What they're saying, essentially, is that the CCP can do whatever it wants and the U.S. can't say anything about it. If you question human rights abuses, as they attempted to do, right, the Chinese Communist Party will shoot back and say, how dare you try to interfere in our internal affairs? In other words, we can abuse our people all we want and you can't say anything about it. That's what they're saying, right? And real quick, seeing Tulipan, you said they get money from China, Josh? Yes, a whole lot of them do. Look at the United Front Work Department and the work they do. Look at the FARA documents, Foreign Agent Registration Act documents, on the number of organizations tied to the United Front Work Department and the number of officials who've taken money from it. I'm talking business leaders in the United States and abroad, politicians in the United States, journalists from every major news outlet, just about, big businesses. They control most of the financial industry, Hollywood, you name it. The full picture would make you sick to your stomach. The number of people who sold themselves out to the CCP. In particular, this branch of the CCP, the United Front Work Department, that works by extending the CCP's strength into foreign countries, controlling the elites in different countries through financial interests or other means, and then uses that as well to not only extend its persecution and suppression of Chinese dissidents outside of China, but to also influence foreign politics. Epoch Times, I've been reporting on United Front since about 2008. And I mean, really, the type of stuff that happens is sickening. I had a woman one time interviewed in New York who told me that the people from these organizations told her they can make her disappear. She was from Taiwan. She was not even from mainland China, right? Taiwanese don't even consider themselves Chinese. They told her they can make her disappear, right? People harassed, spat on, threatened with death, you name it, on American soil in Chinese communities through these organizations. And the media covers for them. Different journalists take paid dinners with them. Politicians take paid travel to China through them, get deals through themselves or their family members with them. And really, the system, until Trump came around, was not called out at all. Really, I mean, sickening stuff. Actually, great reporting on this. Epic Times does a lot on it too, but you can also check out Natalie Winters on National Pulse. She does some really good investigative reporting on the FARA documents as it relates to the United Front Work Department. Really, some really good reporting showing the people who've taken money from these organizations. That's just finish this up. I was getting a bit late. Now, basically, Yang is saying, "How dare you, interfere in China's affairs, quote unquote, by criticizing our human rights abuses?" That's essentially what he's saying. He told the U.S. to mind its own business, and rather than making irresponsible remarks about China's human rights and democracy, what kind of world is that creating, right? Where you can't call out human rights abuses, and calling out human rights abuses is seen as stepping over a red line when it comes to diplomacy. Hopefully, the Biden administration doesn't fall to that. But let's go into this a bit further. The fourth trap, the last one of these, lies in the U.S. side's intention of seeking cooperation with the CCP, even when facing such fierce confrontation. After the talks, Blinken spoke at a press conference about the very specific areas where the United States and China could cooperate. In other words, even after going through all of that, even after seeing that they are not willing to change, even after seeing the Chinese Communist Party will defend all of its human rights abuses, all of its hostile actions against the United States, and insult them in front of the world during that whole thing, that the Biden administration is still willing to cooperate with the Chinese Communist Party. In other words, if this is art of the deal, right, as we saw the Trump administration do, they not only did not play any card they had in their hand, right, they didn't use any of the upper hand they had. Instead, they came in crawling on their knees, essentially, got insulted, had the CC All right, folks. Sorry about that. My internet just totally cut off. All right. Well, maybe it's a good point to end it. Really apologize. That was really bizarre. Um, Sorry if it freaked you all out with that. Yeah, my internet totally cut off for just a second there. All right, folks. Anyways, thanks for sticking around. Really apologize for that. Um, Now I'm going to be doing these broadcasts again, live Q&As Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday. So be sure to tune in again this coming Tuesday, 10:30 p.m. Eastern time. Now that said, folks, again, always appreciate you. Always enjoy talking with y'all. Always a pleasure. All right, folks, again, I'll see you all Tuesday, 10:30 p.m. Eastern time. In the meantime, please check out the different interviews we have going up. I think you really like some of what we have. I also have some very good stuff in the works, so stick around. Said, folks, again, as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.